see nods. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anthony Canataro, Acting Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals in the state of New York. And I just want to tell you how happy I am to be here, how much I'm looking forward to participating in this meeting, and publicly thank Chief Judge Janet DeFiore and Patricia for getting me up to speed in a relatively short amount of time. I'm not convinced I'm fully up to speed, but hopefully I'll be a productive presence at this meeting. And I am not the only new board member here. We have with us to my left, Diane Atkins, who has just joined the board. She is Director of Human Services for Westchester County, oversees a number of offices there, including the Department of Social Services and the Department of Senior Programs and Services, Veterans Affairs, Youth Board, kind of everything. And I established before the meeting started that I've actually met Ms. Atkins before at a pre-pandemic event in Albany, and I'm not good with names and faces. And the fact that I remember you from that meeting speaks to how dynamic and how formidable a presence you are. So I'm sure you're going to be great on this board.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's dive right into the agenda. First item up is approval of the minutes from the June 3rd, 2022 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So,
Is there a second? We have a second on the screen. Thank you very much. I will assume from everyone's patient and serene demeanor that we don't even have to have a vote on this. We can declare the minutes passed by unanimous resolution. Is that correct? Fine.
we got a thumbs up.
So the minutes are approved. On to the second item on the agenda, which is the budget request for fiscal 23-24. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Patricia Warth.
Thank you. So as many people know, the ILS budget and our budget request has two key components. The first component is our state operations, and the second component is our AIDS localities. So I'm going to talk about each component separately and then give folks a chance to talk after each component and ask any questions. So I'll start with our state operations budget. Our state operations budget is that part of our budget which essentially runs the ILS office. So it pays for staff, contracting, everything that is needed to run the office. For the current fiscal year, the budget for state operations is $6.96 million. What we are requesting for budget year 2023-24 is a total of $7.72 million, which is an increase of $759,000. A good part of that increase is to reflect the cost of living salary increases that staff received this past year. But the second part of that increase is our request for 3 new staff positions. And these 3 positions are, first of all, a human resource director. Currently, our office is funded for over 50 positions. We haven't filled them all yet. We're basically at about 30 positions, but we're funded for over 50 positions. And a human resource coordinator would serve 3 essential purposes. One, this position would allow us to better coordinate with other state agencies that we need to coordinate with for, HR purposes. It would also provide us much needed in-house expertise and, sort of legal analysis on the various policies and laws associated with, human resources. But third, and I think very importantly, it would give our staff a resource for the questions that they have, the human resource questions that they have, which is an ongoing issue because currently we're hosted by OGS and it's hard to get that information. So I think this position would be an incredibly important position for our office at our point. The second position that we're requesting is a grants auditor. We currently have 1 auditor in our grants unit, but a second auditor would allow us to streamline our claims review process so that we're processing money more quickly while still ensuring fiscal accountability. Because we could do the follow-up audit to make sure that the spending is as it should be under state and federal rules. So in other words, the auditor would allow ILS to keep the funding flowing in a fiscally responsible way. And then the third position, and this is the one I'm most excited about, is an appellate attorney for parental representation. And this position would report to Cindy, who's our director, Cindy Edders, who's our director of quality improvement for appellate representation, post-conviction representation, in consultation with Lucy McCarthy, who's our new director of parental representation. And the genesis, the idea for this position actually grew out of Lucy's interview when Cindy was questioning her and they started talking. And I'm like, oh my God, we need this position. I mean, there's this, incredible interplay between family court representation and appellate representation for family court orders. And, while Cindy is responsible for that, she's also responsible for criminal. And so this would allow us to have a position that would really carve out and be able to focus on that. This position would also liaison with our statewide appellate support center, which currently will only be able to work on criminal issues. This would expand what that statewide appellate support center is able to do. So that's part of our, that's one of the reasons for the $759,000 increase in our state operations request. So it's pretty basic. But, the two reasons, the salary increases in those three new positions. And before I move on to aids and localities, I want to pause and see if any board members have questions about the state operations request.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, could you just for the benefit of our community members, tell us what happened last year with our requests?
It was fully funded. Our state operations request was fully funded. So we received the new positions that we requested and ongoing funding for our current operations.
That's good.
My question was simply, I noticed in reviewing the minutes from last year that there was a rather big discussion about DEI within the office. And I was wondering if your new HR director would somehow connect with your DEI efforts, or is that a separate operation?
Oh, no, absolutely. Yes, this position, I think, would further enhance our DEI efforts and work hand in hand with Charlie, who's our current DEI liaison.
I have a question. Are these civil service appointments, or they are appointments with a term?
Right. So under the executive law 832, the ILS director has full authority to hire, to nominate positions, to essentially decide what positions the office has. And of course, we do this in consultation with the board during these meetings. But in terms of civil service, we have traditionally asked for our positions to be civil service exempt because so much of what they do involves the type of characteristics that aren't subject to a civil service exam. So working with county officials, having that level of diplomacy. Also, sometimes we obtain inadvertently confidential information. And so has to be expertise on knowing when that happens and how to account for that. So these positions are such that, they fit very well into the civil service exemption process.
So they don't have a term, so can they easily be terminated?
They're management confidential, so yes, they can be. I never.
From one cycle to another, from one
Right.
budget to another, if you decide, I want to write this out,
Right.
there's no repercussion there, you could do it, complete authority to
Yeah.
take something out.
Yeah, though obviously we don't want to do that. And so anytime we request a new position like this, there's been a lot of thought and discussion within the office about the value of that position. So we take very seriously when we hire our commitment to our new hires, that we want to cultivate them to, fully believe in the ILS mission and to work hard towards it. Now, there may be times when we have shifted somebody's responsibilities to meet the needs of the office. And so that does happen. And when we hire, we interview on that possibility.
Is your clerical staff also exempt, or are they?
Yeah, because they have the same sort of responsibilities.
Are there any questions from our remote participants? Yes.
Suzette?
Okay, I don't use WebEx all the time. I was looking for my unmute button. Good morning, everybody. I wish I could be there with you in person. And good morning to everybody else on the screen. Patricia, my question is, I know you're anticipating, well, you're requesting the HR coordinator and also a second grant auditor. Beyond these positions that would facilitate state operations, are you envisioning right now any more positions beyond these that might be needed moving forward?
So hopefully with additional funding for family court representation, and, you know, we would obviously like to eventually bolster even more our family court unit. Now, Lucy will be talking later in the meeting about the current steps that are going to be taken to bolster our family court unit. But I do see, as we hopefully are successfully able to obtain more state funding for family court representation, that, you know, on the state operations side of it, we're also able to bolster the work that we can do and that we're currently doing with regard to parental representation in family court matters. With regard to our grants unit, we're not fully staffed yet. We're funded for more positions, you know, we're going through the hiring process right now. I would like to get the grants unit fully staffed and then do an assessment of whether that staffing is enough or whether we need more. So it's possible that we may in the future also be, you know, bolstering our grants unit.
Okay, yeah, I was mainly asking about the state, about the operations level. So, okay, and, well, yeah, okay, that answers my question, thank you. And sorry, I was remiss, I just want to welcome Diane and also the judge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess that's it for state operations.
Okay, so let me move on to aid to localities. So aid to localities is the funding that ILS disperses to the counties and to New York City. And our current fiscal year budget is $359.31 million. And this funding is used to fund four programs. The first is our distributions and our other grants, and that's $81 million. The second is the Corral Hearing Settlement implementation, which is $23.8 million. The third is the statewide expansion of Corral Hearing, which this current budget year is the 5th year of the 5-year buildup, so it's the full funding of $250 million. And then the fourth program is improved parental representation, which is a much smaller number, $4.5 million. So that's what represents our current fiscal budget for aid to localities. Our request for state fiscal year 23-24 is a total of $382.81 million, which is a 23.5 million increase over our current fiscal year. We're not asking for a change in the 81 million for distributions and grants. We're not asking for a change in the 23.8 or 23.8 million for Corral Hearing Settlement implementation, nor are we asking for a change in the 250 million for statewide implementation. So that funding, we're asking that it remain the same, right? The change, the increase is all for improved quality parental representation. So as part of our requests that we're asking you to approve for fiscal year 23-24, we're asking for a total of $28 million for improved quality parental representation. It's significantly more than what we've requested in the past. The most we've ever requested was last year, we requested $9 million.
And how much did we get?
4.5. So I think that leads to the question, why, how did we come up with 28 million? And I think there's two fundamental reasons. One, it's numerically justified. When we sat down and looked at how much funding the state is dedicating or has appropriated to improve quality representation, It's essentially 278.3 million. Only 4.5 of which is for improved parental representation. So in other words, the state appropriation for improved parental representation is only 1.6% state total for improved mandated representation, criminal and parental, only 1.6%. Yet when we ran the numbers, parental representation constitutes at least 33% of mandated representation. And so there's this inequity. And with the 28 million we're asking, we still don't achieve 33%, right? But we creep closer and get up to 10% of the total state funding for mandated representation. So that's the first reason. It's a numerically justified increase towards improved, towards what the state should be funding for improved quality parental representation. But the second reason is there's just such a real need for it. The quality of parental representation is in crisis right now in the counties and New York City. There's just not enough local funding, and the state needs to step up to the plate and fund this very important part of mandated representation. And while we appreciate the state funding to date, the 2.5 million in fiscal year 21-22, and then the 4.5 million in fiscal year 22-23, it's not enough. And it's only allowed us to disperse funding to counties via a competitive process. And even then, only a small number of counties are able to benefit from it. So, this last round for the 4.5 million, in August, we issued an RFP. We're planning on issuing awards of $750,000 to the awardees over 3 years. And this is something the board approved at its last meeting. We're only going to be able to issue at most 16 awards. And yet over 20 counties applied, 23 counties applied, and not all the counties that really need it applied. So we know the need is there, and 28 million would allow us to use a formula to disperse it to all of the counties. Still wouldn't be enough to solve the problem, but it would be a much better jumpstart than what we're currently able to achieve with the funding that we've got to date. So essentially, we feel this is a justified request because the need far exceeds the funding available, and we think this request starts to move us towards finally meeting that need. So that's essentially what, that full increase for our request for state, for 8 localities is. And on that note, I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions.
Questions?
Let me just ask you, assuming the legislature does the same thing and only gives you that, what will you fund with that?
I think what we would do first is look to see if there's a way that we could disperse it to all the counties, right? And we would try to come up with a formula and see if it would be enough to meet, to at least start doing something, some small level of building and improvement in all the counties. My guess is the answer to that question would be no, to be honest with you, but I would first want to explore that. And then if the answer is no, then we would do another competitive process like we've done in the past. So we would sort of take it in 2 steps to determine the best way. And however we would do it, this board would make that final decision and approval at next June's meeting.
Any other questions? Would you like to continue?
Ready for a vote?
Oh, really? Then I do have a question. It's sort of the inverse of Judge Siparik's question. Whether it's 14 million that you would get or 28 million, it represents a huge increase over past funding, kind of like a tidal wave of cash compared to what's been funded before. I understand that it nowhere meets the existing need, but is there infrastructure in place within the counties to handle even this, relatively modest amount of funding?
There is, I mean, we're seeing that right now with the 5 counties that were awarded the part of the 2.5 million, the RFP that we did for fiscal year 21-22. And, the counties already have requirements, right? They're already required under state constitutional and statutory law to deliver mandated parental representation. So they have some infrastructures there. What this funding does, though, is it allows for improving and bolstering those infrastructures so that, one, attorneys aren't, operating under overwhelming caseloads. I mean, right now, the caseloads in family court matters are astronomical. And you can't deliver quality representation if your caseloads are too high. It would also allow us to start the process of working with counties on what the real model is for family court representation, which is, interdisciplinary approach where you have not only attorneys working on the cases, but social workers, parent advocates. And right now, there's very few offices that have the funding available to use social workers or parent advocates or to hire them. And so this would allow us to start to work with some counties on doing that.
So these are all institutional providers, but what about 18B administrators? Do they get any of those
So
funding?
one of the awardees of the 5 counties that won the first RFP, one of the awardees was Erie County Assigned Counsel Program.
Okay.
And so they're using the funding to make social workers available and parent advocates available to their panel attorneys. And they're also using the funding to promote another recommendation of the commission, which is timely representation. So representation of parents during the child welfare investigation stage. And so they're not only using the funding to pay attorneys during that part of the case, which hopefully doesn't become a case, to be honest with you, but also to put out a know your rights information so that parents who are caught up in a child welfare investigation know who to turn to. So that's an example of how this funding can not only assist institutional providers, but also be used creatively for assigned counsel programs.
All right. Any other questions regarding the budget proposal? All right, hearing no questions, I'll open the floor to a motion to approve the FY 23-24 budget requests.
So
Is there a second?
Second.
Would we like to take a vote by, can we do it by hand since we have people on video? All in favor? All opposed? There being no opposition, the request for approval of the budget proposal is passed. Okay, I think we're moving on next to our third agenda item, which is the update on the Harrell Herring settlement. I'm sorry, implementation. And we're going to hear from Mr. Alpin.
All right, thank you for taking the time to listen to me for a little bit today. What I want to talk about essentially, it's like 3 or 4 different things. One, sort of the process itself of developing the implementation that's going on, some progress that we've made to date, some challenges that we have, and some unique initiatives that I think I'd like to talk about and let you know some of the other sort of things that are going on at the same time. As you know, under Executive Light 32.4, ILS has to develop and implement plans for each county to ensure, and New York City, to ensure counsel arraignment, quality improvement, and caseload compliance with our standards. And so the process itself has been, I think, overall, it's a very, very rewarding process and approach is how I would say, because we don't dictate to the counties, this is what you're going to do. Instead, what we do is we work constructively and collaboratively with them so that they're part of the process. And it's not just the providers of representation like the Legal Aid Society or conflict defender, public defender, assigned counsel, but it's also the county itself. And so the way the reforms work, the only way in my mind to have them be successful is if everybody in that group, us as an ILS, as the agency, the county governments, and the providers, all are invested in what we're doing and on the same page. And so that's what we do. That process, as beneficial and necessary as it is, produces a couple of challenges. One, the main challenge is it's very time consuming, right? So when we started, we sort of fell back a year behind initially to develop the plans. And so my predecessor, Joanne McCree, was instrumental with Leahy in developing those plans. And it was a very time consuming, labor intensive, collaborative process as well. And we fell a little bit behind, I would say probably about a year. So part of the challenge that we've had is to try to, as we end the 5-year period, catch up. And so what we did was, for counties that were developing their year 3 and 4 budgets, we combined them because so a county was a year behind, many of them allowed us to do 2-year budget cycles at once. And so we're closing the gap. And then what we're doing now with this is anyone who hasn't completed year 4 at this point is also doing a combined year 4 and year 5 budget. And we anticipate being able to complete that process before the next fiscal year kicks in. And so, and we're really very, very focused on that because I think it's going to be very important going forward with how we're going to manage things. So, that process, it's slow. It was hampered, I will say, by the pandemic a lot. And it was hampered in 2 ways. I mean, internally, counties in the beginning were very nervous about what was going to happen. And so there was a lot of hesitancy to move forward. And we were in the point in the budget cycle where it was only in about a year 2, year 3. And so it was still very predictive about what was going to happen. And so that slowed it down, but I think we really worked through that. It took the settling down of what was going to happen with the pandemic for that to happen. And the other piece that we missed really heavily was the face-to-face conversation. It really matters to go to a place and sit down and talk to people. And I know from my prior role at ILS, where I was Director of Quality Enhancement and Criminal Defense Trials, I literally went everywhere and talked to people. It's like, what do you need? And seeing what their circumstances are. And so we kind of got a little setback. The technology was very good with phone calls and Zoom meetings and WebEx and all of that. And now we're back to some in-person meetings, and it really speeds things up because sometimes like a provider may not be sure of what to do, and one of my team members, and sometimes with me, sometimes by themselves, will go and they'll sit and they'll just draft the budget out, and they talk and they can get it done. And so it speeds up. And the other thing that I'm noticing too is it was very difficult in the beginning because when we were only at 20% of the total, it was kind of like it was hard to predict sort of what we would need kind of going forward. But now when we're at sort of year 4, you could see the structure built into the budget, most of which is being carried over. And then you're at the point where like, okay, what do I want to add now to really fulfill the mission? And it's allowed us to focus on making sure the caseload compliance is there, right? Because we could really see, with working with our, the director of research, to really look at the numbers of what's needed. And so that the process is a little bit quicker because now we're kind of more at the end. And so I'm confident and hopeful that we'll get caught up on things. And so that's sort of, one of the base challenges. The other challenge, the other thing before I get into some of the other challenges, just sort of talking about and what we're sort of doing as an overview, right? So we submitted the performance measures as an attachment here to the board meeting, and there's some numerical things that I'll point out in there. But I think it's important to understand our mission. We have sort of a general mission with both institutional providers and assigned counsel. And for an institutional provider office, we want to reduce caseloads by adding lawyers, but we also want to improve space We want to make sure they have the technology that they need to be able to function in a modern legal law firm environment type thing. We want to make sure they have ancillary resources in order to work up their cases so that they can fund experts, they can fund sentencing advocacy, they can fund investigation. The discovery laws have changed, so we want to be really careful about trying to put in the technology so they can manage that. And so we're looking and we want to improve salaries so that we can retain and recruit people. And so with every sort of public defender, legal aid society, conflict defender, we're looking at this sort of big picture, and we're seeing within each office how much funding we have available and trying to use that funding as the best way to kind of create a really well-functioning place that people want to work there. If a client comes into the office, they feel like I'm in a professional legal office, right? We want to reduce, any kind of feeling of like being stigmatized to being at the bottom of the barrel, right? We want, we're really trying to create professional quality, like law offices is how I look at it on a different scale. Assigned counsel, we're doing something similar in its mission. The mission for assigned counsel has been to convert assigned counsel programs onto the same level as indigent defense providers, as like institutional providers, right? So we don't want the assigned counsel programs to sort of be like the second-class citizens in the public defense community, right? They need to be really able to represent their clients just as much as a public defender office. And so we've spent a lot of time putting structures in place. And when I first started at ILS, I think there was a handful of administrators in 4 or 5 counties, and it was basically without a system. Now, I think there's only a handful that don't have an administrator yet. I think we're down to like 2 or 3. So every county has at least an administrator, and they have the programs. We're starting to put into sort of a form of programs that is uniform across the state. And so there's funding for expert witnesses, experts, that kind of thing. There are mentoring programs, second chair programs that allow, in complex cases to have 2 lawyers. In a situation where a lawyer is practicing misdemeanors and maybe wants to try felonies, they can be paired up with a felony lawyer. We're trying to put in funding for appellate consultations and resource attorneys so that there's people to brainstorm the legal research aspects of their cases. And so we're putting in this structure that's in place. And I think that's been like a really critical aspect of what we've done. And we've built these programs really using our standards as a guidance, using the lessons we learned from the original 5-county HH settlement, right? And that's where the model was first created, and it's now been expanded. And I think when we look, at least, when you start to look at what's happening across the board with assigned counsel programs in the state, in my view, it's revolutionary, right? And I say not evolutionary, but revolutionary, because it started, when I started at ILS in 2012, it was not in existence. And now we're in 2022 and it is in existence, right? It's here and they're in place. And one of the initiatives I'll talk about relates to how we're sort of trying to work with that in a few minutes. But that's kind of like an overview of like what we're doing with the offices. The performance measures, they really reflect the numbers I sort of picked out. One relates to counsel first appearance, one to caseload, and the other to quality. And the performance measures are designed to help us track implementation of like how much money is being spent and how the progress is going according to numbers. And in the counsel of first appearance, our funding our performance measures show that we've represented that over 101,000 people have been represented in arraignment as a result of statewide funding so far. For caseloads, there's been 565 new attorneys hired since we've started. 340 are new hires, 46 are like increasing from say part-time to full-time. And then there's a number, 178 that are by contract. And then with the quality improvement piece, the support positions we're starting to see, we've got maybe 259 new hires, 18 upgrades, and 64 by contract. And those could be investigators, mitigation experts, things of that nature. And so the numbers are starting to be there. This brings me to my sort of other second challenge, which I think is maybe it's our biggest challenge, and it is recruitment and retention, and particularly in rural areas, but not entirely. The big urban areas have their own challenges, but in the rural area, what we're seeing, we have a lot of positions created, but we have more budget that have yet to be filled. And so I think we need to focus on trying to get lawyers into particularly rural offices to fill out so that they can really achieve caseload compliance. Because like Tricia said, in the family court context, it's obviously true in the criminal court context, you cannot function effectively as a lawyer with too many cases. I mean, you're forced to triage. You'll do well in certain cases, but other things will sort of not, they'll fall through the cracks. And so getting lawyers into rural areas is a really important thing. And I know that the Bar Association is focused on that. I think people really understand that. And we have strategies with that. And part of the strategy is to create the professional environment, right? To improve the space, to increase the salaries, to budget the positions, to work with counties to understand that it's really important to hire, to say that hiring is beneficial to the county, bringing in, building up your legal community is an important thing in counties. And so, so that's one piece of it. And then the assigned count on the assigned counsel front, the rates have been stagnant, for, and I know I was an 18A lawyer for a while, and I know what it was like. This was going back, going back 20 years or so, but but the rates are the same as when I was practicing as an 18B lawyer 20 years ago, or 20 plus years ago. So that I think will spur recruitment, if that ever happens. And then it dovetails with the structures we're creating, right? Because if you see the rates raising, there may be people who have not practiced criminal defense work before, people who are, so we're sort of very well set up, I think, to manage the transition into that. And then in the city, you have, I think there's more of a natural inclination to maybe want to work in the city if you're coming out of law school, right? It's exciting to live in New York City, right? You can't really deny that. I don't live here. She's having a great time. Right. But the salaries don't always match the cost of living. They have their problems. So they have that as an issue that they have to face, because you lose people. And I can remember back to when I was working in the conflict defender in Albany, it was at the time the salaries were sort of stagnant. There was one lawyer who, as soon as he got married and had kids, had to leave, right? He couldn't afford it. And so I think the salary piece is very important. And we have to balance in our budget development, increasing salaries with making sure we've got the caseload requirements there. And so it's a challenge, but I think like most challenges, it's a really rewarding and exciting process. And then the last thing, I'm trying to keep to time, but a couple of quick initiatives that we've done that are sort of layered on top of what I've been talking about. One is an idea that came out of one of my team lawyers, Claire Canidal, got into some conversation with a couple of one lawyer in particular, talking about office culture, talking about like the leadership issues that the head of the office was facing. And so we ended up deciding to work with Gideon's Promise, which is a national organization designed to do public defense training and morale and leadership. And we created a program where we got a cross-section, and it was a cross-section of ACP administrators and public defense providers, and they met once a month to sort of discuss leadership issues. And several of them are going to continue to work with Gideon's Promise, and we're looking forward to doing a sort of a next round. And so that was a great project, and it was also a great project because we were able to sort of combine my team with the HH team. and Lisa Robertson and Claire Knittel they worked together. And so it was like a joint sort of team effort, two-team effort to do this. So it was rewarding internally and also for the lawyers that participated in it. And then the other development is also another joint sort of HH and statewide team initiative that we've done, our assigned counsel program summits. And so every couple of months we put together a program that deals with the things that we're asking the assigned counsel programs to do, because they didn't necessarily know what to do. So it's like, if we want them to do mentoring programs, so we'll do a summit on how do you set up a mentoring program? We'll do issues on, okay, you've got money for spending expert witnesses. How do you implement that within your county? So we regularly identify issues that we think might be new or of interest to the various assigned counsel program leaders, and we meet as a group, and that's where technology is great, because we can get 50, 60 people in a meeting, for a couple hours on an afternoon, in a weekday, and go over those things. So those are two, initiatives I think are worth sort of seeing what we're doing, and we try to think like that. We try to layer on top, what kind of ideas can we come up with to improve the quality, because it's one thing to get everything on paper and get everything in place, but then we have to really, start to dig in and try to change office culture and how people are doing things. So that's my update.
And can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do the attorneys, like in family court, do they have regulated caseload, standard caseload sizes?
This is a good question for Liz. I believe we do have we have standards. The difference is, and I think this is part of why our funding ask in family court is important, is we have funds. The thing that's great about statewide funding is it's implementing our caseload standards.
But only in criminal
In
cases.
criminal cases
Oh,
only.
Right, and so
Yeah.
ILS has developed over the years caseload standards for both criminal cases and for family court matters. The statewide funding, the 250 million for the statewide implementation and the 23.8 million for voluntary settlement implementation is the state funding needed to implement those standards in criminal cases only. What year was it? End of 2021, the ILS board approved caseload standards for family court representation, but that approval was contingent on the availability of state funding in order to implement that. Because right now, there aren't the resources available in the counties to actually implement the caseload standards. So right now, you're in this sort of universe in which there's funding for improved quality in caseload standards in criminal, but not in civil, not family.
Yeah, because I was asking, because I know in Westchester, we have caseload standards in family court. And it's always been an issue in terms of the attorneys, they'll say, I'm overworked, I got a case, so I was just wondering about that.
Yeah,
It's like, it's not balanced.
yeah. And in Westchester, my understanding is sometimes judges assign despite those caseload standards. So, yeah.
Matt, just for my own personal edification, you were talking about raising the quality of assigned counsel programs to meet the standard that you sort of are developing simultaneously in the legal service provider world. And you talked about mentoring, second seating, appellate consultations. Who provides those kinds of services for the assigned counsel?
So the administrator, and depending on the size of the program, so if we will get an administrator in there, and then we will fund a budget line for a mentoring program and a second chair program and expert witnesses. And so the administrator, in a larger program, they'll have, if you look at the Erie County program, they have a training director and quality and criminal defense quality enhancement person, a forensic person, an appellate person. So they have the staff in there to kind of implement those programs. Where it's a smaller county, it falls on the administrator. And so we try to provide training and try to help them, give them suggestions about how to sort of set up that. And we will, usually like the appellate piece will usually set up a line for, say, appellate consultation. And usually the administrator will know a lawyer who practices in that area that maybe specializes in appeals that can be contracted with, on a case to help with research and to give some, guidance. So it depends on sort of the size of the program. And so usually, the larger programs are in a position to have like substantive staff, like in addition to the administrative staff, like some of the supervising attorney would be a position. We would create somebody that's going to sort of work with the panel directly, because with the tricky part, I mean, I think running an assigned counsel program in a lot of ways is more difficult than a public defender office in that you have to persuade the lawyers to work with you. You can't, it's a little bit of a different thing. And so they have to sort of really try to develop ways to collaborate with the panel, make the panel aware of the resources and kind of guide them into it. The second chair program is a very smooth, pretty smooth running from what I've seen, like that kind of fits. And that's an easier one to set up. But the mentoring programs, there's a number of them that have been successful over the last couple of years.
A good example there is Onondaga County.
Yeah.
They were one of the first to establish a mentoring program, and they actually, you had to apply to be a mentor. So they had about 10 people apply, and they only chose 8 of them to be mentors. And the mentors, some of them are panel attorneys themselves who just have a great deal of experience and expertise and a commitment to quality. Some of them aren't on the panel. In Onondaga County, one of the mentors, he's not on the panel, but he has a statewide reputation for expertise in New York sentencing and early release programs, which is everybody here knows New York sentencing is a little bit complex. And they actually recruited a former judge to be a resource too, because if you ever want a judge's deed on something. So there's a lot of creativity across the state and how the different assigned counsel programs are fashioning their mentor programs.
We try to create space too, so there's a resource, like in some places there's like a resource room or a place where the assigned counsel program exists, so that there's a place to meet. Again, like Erie County's got a training room that they've set up so they conduct CLEs in there. But some of the smaller places we're getting them into where they have their own space so that they can get the lawyers in there.
It's a terrific report. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, then. We can move on to the next agenda item, which will be, I guess, hello and introduction to Lucy McCarthy, who's going to talk about her new work as Director for Quality Enhancement in Parental Representation.
Thank you. Good morning. Probably still morning.
Good morning. Yes.
Got 8 more minutes.
For most of the board members and all of my colleagues at ILS, it wouldn't be news for me to tell you that Angela Burton had a profound impact on this office during her tenure, the last 10 years as the director. She certainly laid the groundwork for change in parent representation, in cultivating relationships with the providers. And then seeking the assistance of those providers, we've developed practice standards for child welfare cases. And as special advisor to the Commission on Parental Legal Representation, she helped produce the interim report. I was lucky to join her as a special advisor to the Commission. And the recommendations within the interim report were called actions for ILS, certainly. So they resulted in partnership with providers where we determined the caseload standards that have now been accepted by this board. We have expanded ILS eligibility standards to include family court. It already existed for criminal matters. And the interim report also helped us promote interdisciplinary representation as the gold standard. Because of Angela's adherence and our adherence at ILS to the interdisciplinary standard, she was able to shepherd our first model office in Westchester, which is now up and running, that highlights the usefulness and utility, I guess, of the interdisciplinary practice model. When I was looking to join her, we also launched the Family Defense Quality Improvement Caseload Grant. The RFP, those 5 awards are now up and running and being distributed to the counties to help with caseloads in child welfare matters. It is my honor and goal to continue her work by continuing to build a family unit at ILS. Right now, we've posted for the assistant counsel position, my former position, and we hope to be able to post for our program associate and researcher to join Melissa Mackey, I'm sorry, the research team, the research director soon. We'll continue to work with the Commission on Rural Representation. They need to produce a final report. They are a temporary commission and hoping to produce that in the coming, I would say year, but the pandemic certainly put off their work a little bit. My long-term goal is the same as Angela's is to elevate the practice of public defense, parent representation to protect the due process of New Yorkers and to keep families intact. And I'm actually thrilled for this opportunity, and I'm so happy. I'm grateful for the warm welcome from you, the board members. I hope to work with you more on the projects as well.
Any questions regarding parental representation and Lucy's work there? Yes. That's Suzanne.
I just want to thank Lucy for that introduction and just for my part, know that I have great confidence in your ability to carry on, and I'm looking forward to how you can advance this very important area of parental representation, particularly in keeping with the recommendations that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation.
It's a really exciting time with this budget request. We're right at the brink of having an opportunity to work on coming up to the standard that we need for New Yorkers.
It's been a long time coming. Thank you.
Yeah, I won't debate the necessity for quality representation on the criminal side. Obviously, that was settled a long time ago. But I come from a means of life court background, and the lack of representation, quality representation there is something that I've been acutely aware of for a long time. So I think you're right. This is just a very exciting time going into this critically important area of underrepresentation. So thank you.
Yes.
Judge, may I- one more question? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering, Lucy, if you could speak to anything that we could be looking to coming down the pike. I know at, I don't know if it was at the last meeting or one before it, we were talking about, you know, the possibility of some legislation being contemplated. Can you talk to this? Can you speak to the status of that and where that is?
Do you mean legislation that the commission is preparing?
Yes, specifically with regard to parental representation.
Yes, they have prepared legislation that they hope to be able to bring to a larger group of providers and get input about that would give ILS would devise a family defense unit within, or a family representation unit within ILS. There was a commission meeting yesterday. Nothing had been determined at that point. So, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last sentence of what you said.
I'm sorry, they hadn't made a decision yesterday about that legislation. It's still in the works.
Is there-
I'm assuming we'll be updated.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question from Lenny.
Good morning, Lenny Noisette. Hello, everyone. Thanks for that presentation, Lucy. I'm wondering, is there an update on the efforts to access the federal funding streams?
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that?
Is there an update on on ILS's effort to access the federal funding that you guys have talked about in the past?
I'm sorry, I think you mean the 4E funding stream?
Federal.
Yes. So about a 4E, the Social Security Act, the federal funding stream, the reimbursement, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I don't remember under what provision of law, but I remember there was an opportunity to work with, I think, the Office of Children and Family Services to try to access some federal funding that was available for parental representation.
We do currently have that program up and running at ILS. The counties can enroll in that program. What they do is they sign a memorandum of understanding with Office of Children and Family Services. And ILS is the body that approves the quality enhancement plans that are developed in concert with the counties. So they talk about how they're going to invest that reimbursement that's coming back from the federal government to the counties. And we get an approximation of what we think the reinvestment would be based on a percentage of how much the county's already spending. So yes, the counties are enrolling. We are actively doing that. Jamie Blair, Assistant Counsel, is my cohort in that effort, and we meet with the counties when they ask to enroll.
So, simply put, the Office of Child and Family Services is responsible for all of the claiming and the disbursement of the funding. Our role is to approve any plan to use the funding to improve the quality of parental representation. So it's been a very interesting relationship between the Office of Child and Family Services, who under federal law has to disperse the funding, but our office in making sure that the funding is being used to improve the quality of representation.
Am I correct that that funding is provided for cases where foster care is an element, or is it more broad-based than that?
It's where a child is either in foster care or eligible.
Okay,
And that's a determination that's made outside of ILS, that's made
of course.
from it, yeah.
Yes, Suzanne? You're muted, Jude. Sorry. Sorry.
Invariably will happen every once in a blue moon. Yeah, sorry. I just noticed that Judge Peters is also on the call, and I know Lucy mentioned that the commission hadn't made a decision yet, but wanted to thank also Judge Peters and the commission for their work, and wondering if there are any thoughts when that information on the draft legislation will be ready for sharing, as well as any information with regard to Lenny's question.
I'm sorry, from ILS?
Yeah, I mean, Suzette, our understanding is that the commission is continuing to work on the legislation with the goal of having something ready for the this coming legislative session.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. If there are no further questions, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is item number 5, which is our update on the Harrell Harding settlement compliance effort. And that will be Patricia.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting, ongoing implementation of the Harrell Harding settlement. And this is the settlement that goes to 5 counties: Onondaga, Ontario, Schuyler, Suffolk, and Washington. And the settlement funding is the settlement essentially provides that the state shall fund these 5 counties to improve the quality of mandated criminal representation. And in basically 3 areas: counsel at arraignment, quality improvements, as well as caseload relief. So it's a little bit of what we talked about. The ILS's responsibility with regard to the settlement is to both work with the counties on implementation and the state on the state funding needed to implement, which we've been doing, and to consistently monitor and provide reports, both oral and written, to the parties on the status of implementation. So since 2016, in our reports that we're required to issue with regard to the settlement, we have consistently noted that the failure to increase the assigned council rates is a looming crisis. That if those rates aren't increased, the counties, the 5 settlement counties, frankly, the counties across the state would have challenges and probably would be able to comply with caseload standards and quality initiatives, particularly those set forth in the settlement. So we've been saying that since 2016. This past April, as part of our regular reporting requirement, we said the crisis is here. And we're right on the precipice, particularly, in all 5 counties, we're almost at that point. In May 16th of 2022, we sent a letter to the parties essentially saying the crisis had been fully realized in 2 counties, Onondaga County and Schuyler County. It was realized in Onondaga County because Onondaga's primary provider of mandated representation is the assigned counsel program. They don't have a public defender office. And so their assigned counsel programs is bleeding attorneys. They can't retain attorneys and they can't recruit new attorneys to the panel. And so the attorneys who are taking cases are taking too many cases. And in some cases, attorneys are, the ACP is forced to assign attorneys to cases who really don't have quite the experience they should have to take that type of case. So that was Onondaga. In Schuyler, the problem is a little bit different. They have a small public defender office, but when you have a small office and one person leaves, that puts caseload standard compliance in jeopardy. And so Schuyler manages that by having a caseload overflow program to the assigned counsel program. But if the assigned counsel program doesn't have enough attorneys to take those cases, that puts caseload standard compliance at jeopardy, both for the public defender office and ACP. So that's what we set forth in our May 16th letter. We also noted at the end of that letter that while the crisis had come to fruition in those 2 counties, it would soon come to fruition in the rest of the counties, the remaining 3 counties. So that May 16th letter resulted in the plaintiffs on May 24th issuing a noncompliance notice to the state. And that noncompliance notice triggers a negotiation period between the plaintiffs and the state to negotiate a way to resolve this noncompliance issue. We're not part of those negotiations unless one of the parties invites us into the negotiations. And periodically throughout the negotiation period, we were asked to participate, either to provide information or advice to the parties, which we did. Now, we weren't involved in it, we weren't at the table consistently, but they brought us in from time to time to give information and expertise. And we fulfilled our obligation to do that. There still hasn't been a final negotiated resolution to this issue. And so on September 7th, the plaintiffs filed an escalation notice pursuant to Section 11 of the settlement. And that escalation notice triggers, it basically allows them under the terms of the settlement to seek a judicial resolution to this non-compliance issue. So that's where it's at right now. Now, our understanding is that the negotiations are still continuing and that it is possible that judicial intervention may be part of a negotiated resolution to this non-compliance issue. But again, we're not at the table for all the negotiations, so we don't fully know what's going on, but that's our current understanding. So I just wanted to make sure that the board was updated on that. The issue's continuing. And like I said, we're optimistic that there will be a negotiated resolution to this issue.
Should require legislation.
I think it could require legislation or alternatively a judicial order.
But would you have to bring the case?
Right.
And that could take a while, that could take several years.
That, well, and I can't speak to, again, I can't speak to what the parties are negotiating. I think the hope is that they could manage this so that it wouldn't take several years, so that there could be a quick resolution. I think that's what they're working towards.
I just have a tangential question. I noticed when I was reviewing the materials of this part of the presentation that there was an effort being made to reach out to judges and magistrates to better understand the nature of the 18B crisis in the settlement counties. And I'm wondering if that survey had been done and whether any actionable information had come from that, or how did that work out?
So that survey was something different. That was really surveying judges and magistrates in the 5 oral hearing settlement counties to get their perspectives on how well implementation was working of the settlement as a whole. So those questions did not focus on the assigned counsel rates. Although I do have to say, despite the fact that we didn't actively elicit information about the assigned counsel rates, several judges did know that the assigned counsel rates they volunteered that the assigned counsel rates need to be increased. So, and I think that's relevant, that it doesn't come from a question, it comes from,
A sense of urgency.
yeah.
Well, certainly heavy lobbying by the State Bar Association and other bar associations on this issue.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of allies in this issue.
And I don't think this is a one and done. You have to keep pressing the issue. Yeah. Are there any more questions on the H&H settlement? Okay. Thank you, Patricia. And we have last, the ILS office update from Bertrand Phillips.
Hi, everybody, and I can now say good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but it's good to see everybody and welcome certainly to the newest members of the board and the chief judge. So I'm going to provide some updates on ILS hiring, as well as some space that we're acquiring. On the hiring side, it's a combination of both backfilling vacant positions and hiring for newly created positions. So I'm going to start with some of the newest members of our ILS team. At the last meeting, I had announced that we had made offers to 2 candidates for the position of Harrell Herring Implementation Attorney for Quality Enhancement and the Statewide Implementation Attorney for Caseload Standards. And I'm very pleased to announce that both candidates accepted and started with ILS on September 1st. So Allison Clifford is our new HH Implementation Attorney for Quality Enhancement. Allison most recently served as the principal law clerk to Albany County Court Judge William Carter. She served as court attorney in Albany City Court for a number of years and has wide-ranging experience, including private practice, appellate work, and family law. And then Madeline Rasmussen is our statewide implementation attorney for caseload standards. She's coming to ILS with experience providing direct representation in criminal defense cases at both the Warren County Public Defender's Office and the Nassau County Legal Aid Society. So 2 very different counties, 2 very different institutional providers that she has experience with. And we're very glad to have both Allison and Madeline on board. They're already hard at work getting up to speed, and we welcome them again to the ILS team. We also want to welcome to our team our newest hire, our administrative assistant, Leah Darlington, who started with us on Thursday. Leah comes to us from the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Albany County and has professional experience working in a number of legal offices. Those of us who are on the hiring committee for her position were very impressed with Leah's very clear diligence and professionalism, and she's going to be a really wonderful asset to the office. Turning now to our statewide appellate support center. At the last meeting, I was able to announce that we have made offers to candidates for the senior appellate attorney position, as well as a mid-level appellate attorney, and that both had accepted those offers, but they were still going through the state's budget director approval process at that time, so I was not able to name them, but now I can. So our senior appellate attorney is Mandy Jaramillo. She is starting with us next week and will be instrumental in building the staff for the rest of the statewide appellate support center. Mandy comes to us from the Office of the Appellate Defender in New York City, where she most recently served as supervising attorney and director of reinvestigation. She has also worked for the Innocence Project and the Center for Family Representation. And our new appellate attorney is Kelly Egan. Kelly will be starting with us in October. She has worked for the last 8 years at the Rural Law Center of New York, most recently serving as their appeals director. And she's also served on both criminal and family law assigned appellate panels in the 3rd Judicial Department. And we're all very excited to have Mandy and Kelly join us as the first 2 employees of that statewide appellate support center. Speaking of the center, we are currently in the process of interviewing candidates for 2 additional mid-level appellate attorneys. They'd be coming in at the same level as Kelly, a junior appellate attorney, and a paralegal. We are also currently posting and accepting resumes for an assistant counsel for parental representation to backfill Lucy's position upon her ascending to director. And we will very soon, in the next week or so, start posting for a number of other positions. We will be filling or backfilling a total of 4 grants unit positions. So that, as Patricia mentioned earlier, we can fully staff our grants unit for the first time. We have a family court senior research associate and a family court program associate, 2 new positions that Lucy mentioned that were approved in last year's state budget. And for the statewide appellate support center, we still have 2 more positions to fill, the investigator and the case manager. And finally, we also still need to go through the civil service classification process. That's another thing that Patricia mentioned earlier, for 7 positions in total. One is an assistant manager of information services to help bolster the work that Peter Avery, our manager of information services, does as we continue to grow as an office. And then 6 positions to fully staff our Western New York Regional Support Center, which is a new office that's coming on board, and I'll have an update on the space in just a moment. But those 6 positions are an attorney in charge, an assistant counsel for criminal defense, an assistant counsel for family court, an assistant counsel for appeals, a resource support and data specialist, and an administrative assistant. Once we have that civil service approval, which we are expecting we will get in October at the next meeting of the Department of Civil Service, we will be able to move forward with recruiting and hiring for those positions. And my last item before I'll throw it up for questions, our Western New York Regional Support Center. As I updated the board in our last meeting, we are continuing to make progress on acquiring that office space in downtown Buffalo in the Main Place Tower, for those of you who are familiar with downtown Buffalo, to accommodate that 6-person staff that I mentioned. We're very close to executing the 10-year lease for that space. The finances have been approved, and that lease will commence on January 1st, 2023. Between the necessary build-outs that we need in the space and the time that it will take to fully hire up the Regional Support Center staff, we're anticipating a move-in date of somewhere around March or April of next year. And that's that. As you can see, a lot going on. It's a very exciting time at ILS.
Congratulations on all that activity.
Now you know why we need an HR manager.
Seriously. It's gonna be a far-flung job. I mean, that Buffalo operation sounds very impressive.
Yeah, no, and we're very lucky that we have support from providers and county officials in Buffalo to do this.
My birthplace.
That building is right next door to my building. It's a very nice location.
So you're gonna take everybody for lunch, Vince?
I'll do better than that. I'll have a welcoming party once we're open. Let me know. We'll have a welcoming party.
Nice.
Bring over some buffalo wings.
That's great.
Make sure the invitations go out with plenty of time.
Absolutely.
All right, any other questions on office updates? Any new business before we adjourn today's meeting that anyone needs to bring? Wonderful, hearing none. We are adjourned till the next meeting, December 2nd of this year, at which I anticipate I will have the honor and pleasure of seeing you all again. And thank you for such an informative and efficient meeting. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank
We
you.
are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lenny. Thanks, Suzette. Thanks, Vince.
I'm missing out on the.
Bye.
I know.
Isn't it?
I have to get the latest.
Oh, it's just.